Hi, this is Ian Berry, and I'm thrilled today to have with me my friend Geoff McDonald, the Ideas Architect, and also Paul, who's joining us by train. He's on the train in Brisbane at the moment. But we're here to have a Sparkination conversation. A Sparkination is a spark that ignites passion, that leads to action, that changes what's normal. And today we're inspired by the work of Cal Newport, who wrote a wonderful book called Deep Work. And in that book, he talked about work that's meaningful, valuable, and rare. And Geoff and I, we've had a number of private conversations, haven't we, Geoff, over the years? But it's a passion for Geoff and I, and hopefully you too, Paul. And so here we are today to talk in more detail about what's meaningful, what's valuable, and what's rare. And I thought we'd kick off, Geoff, with some thoughts around what's meaningful work.
Yeah, I guess this book was kind of one of those really big insight. Like I called it my book of the year when I was doing the book wrappers back in 2016. So I was reading probably 50 books for the year. So to be the top book means it has to be not only insightful, but it actually had to mean something for me. And the meaningful work piece for me, I thought I was doing, so there's kind of that challenge around, I do work to make money, and we all do that, but it's kind of like, what's the thing that actually sustains me over time? And it's got to be work that actually is valuable to me, because I found I was getting these offers from clients and it was just like, well, to be honest, I don't want to do that. Like, sure, I'll take your money, but in a couple of cases, I actually took the money, and then it was like, oh no, do I have to do that? And it was really the meaningfulness. It was just like, I didn't see that as a valuable project or something that I wanted to engage in. And I think the other trick on it is when I started writing and reading around the minimalism stuff, and particularly the pursuit of happiness, that we've probably all seen those stats around engagement and how low the engagement levels are by most people in organizations, like anything up to 60 to 80% of people are not engaged in their work. And I think the big trap is that we think it's about the work. And it's kind of this thing about meaningful work. Yeah, there's a point where the work itself stimulates me, thrills me, excites me, and I want to explore it. But there's also a point of, what am I bringing to this situation? And that's actually where the meaning occurs. The meaning is not in the work. The meaning is what we bring to the situation or what we attribute to the work. So it's kind of that classic cliche story of the three guys working on the building site, and one guy's stacking bricks, the next guy's building the wall, and the third guy's building a cathedral. It's like they're all doing the same work, but it's like, what are they bringing to their interpretation of the work and the value that it offers to other people?
Reminds me of that wonderful David White insight that in leadership, the conversation's not about the work, the conversation is the work.
Yeah, I think that's where we've missed it. I think we've become so transactional in a lot of our work. It's like what we were just hinting at before when we're talking about meetings. We go into meetings and it's all, oh, you do this, I'll do that. When are you going to get it done, and how are we going to get that done? And that's an important part of work, but it's kind of transactional. And if we don't deal with the other side of it around meaning and purpose and value, that's kind of the relational piece of work. And we can't do work in isolation anymore. Like the example that would be, sure, I could sit down and write a book on my own in my own private house, but it's kind of useless to anybody if they never actually engage with it. So work very much is about interactions and engagement with other people. And that's why these conversations about what is meaningful is so critical, because fundamentally it's about our motivation and our energy and our engagement with the work. And that's what's often missing, that people are actually, partly the work is designed poorly, but it's also partly people haven't triggered that it's like, hang on, it's up to you to bring something to this work as well.
So describe a bit of meaningful work for you, Geoff.
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess for me, it's about two things. So it either has to be something where I'm learning, and it has to be something that I think might be insightful or be worth sharing to somebody else. So for me, it's almost in that teacher, learner, creator space, that I want to learn something. So that's the first thing. And it's learning not for the sake of learning, but learning's always from the basis of having a better understanding of the world. So for example, it's like, what am I going to do today? Well, my sense of the world is blah, blah, blah. And then I kind of create in that space. So I am creating from the point of view to learn for myself. But as I said, I don't want that to be in a vacuum. It needs to be in relation to other people. So it's like, okay, I can learn this. I think this might be valuable to you. And then I share it. And then that's the engagement. So that's the meaning. So it's like some sense of progress as in learning, but also some sense of contribution and interaction, and also learning from the people I share with, because often they go, oh, have you thought about it like this?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I've linked the words meaningful and valuable. And I think this is really at the heart of the new world of work. I'm able to do something that's meaningful for me and yet valuable for you.
Yeah, I think if those two aren't there, you're kind of not going to be able to sustain things. So I
No.
can, like, if you gave me a task, I can do the task, but at some point I'm going to get bored by it if it's not something I think is meaningful or even valuable. And at the same time in business, if you're not creating something of valuable to your clients and customers, well, you're not going to be in business for that long, or you're not going to be that successful.
No, I think that's even more so in, this pandemic world, and I think the post-pandemic world. In my view, we're not going back to normal, and normal was never a good idea anyway. I'm only interested in the status quo or normal if it's serving me and the rest of humans. And so the status quo or normal is okay for me in that regard. If it's serving us, then terrific, let's keep doing it. But I think a lot of what we do in the workplace isn't serving us, and a lot of what we do in society is not serving us. And so we end up with this chasm of lack of meaning, and a lack of value. And so this idea, I'm interested in your thoughts, Paul, if you're able to share about this connection between doing work that's meaningful for me and yet valuable for other people. Paul might be
just in a very noisy space for now. Just give me 5 or 10 minutes and I'll be.
That's okay. We'll sort of hook you in about 10 minutes time then, Paul, and we'll just keep at it until then. I've spent about a decade, as you know, Geoff, really honing in on doing what I love with people who love what I do for them.
Yeah.
And so I think it's the best place to work.
Yeah.
So I'm doing what I love, but I'm doing it for people that love what I do for them. So it's the consequences of, for them, which is where this value, comes into it. And I'm always asking the people that I work with, what is it that you value? And what more would you like of that? And how would you like it delivered? I think, understanding value is one thing, but understanding how it's delivered is another thing. And I think this is part of the equation as well.
I think so. I think, well, even this conversation here we were talking about it before, about live conversations versus Zoom conversations, and how having a live conversation, there's something to be had from the energy or the emotion or the interaction of physically being in the same space as people. But there's also something to be had here. And I think Paul's a good example here. Ian and I are both down here near Geelong, and Paul's up in Brisbane on a train, or was on a train. And it's kind of like the Zoom, the virtual technology allows for other levels of interaction from further afield, and that's valuable as well. And I think that's part of what we need to consider around what work we're doing, is how do we want to interact with people? What are the relationships you have with people? And some of that is how we consistently interact with them. So if I only ever sent you text messages, Ian, well, that'd be one form of relationship. But if we actually had coffee every month, that would be a different type of relationship. And that's kind of what we're pointing to. What are these interactions and touch points, if you like?
Yeah, and I think too, it's getting a fix on and a feel for, virtual. Like this is not a virtual conversation. This is a real conversation.
Mm.
And I have this interesting dialogue with a couple of people. They say, "Oh, you're only working virtually." Well, no, I'm not working virtually. I'm working live. I'm just using technology to do it. Yes, it's different to being in person,
Yes.
but we're still live. We're still in this moment.
And you can have a deep conversation on the telephone without seeing somebody as well. And
Yeah.
likewise, in an office situation, you could actually be working with someone for 10 years and not have any relationship with them apart from do this, do that.
And a lot of
So,
the conversations that have taken places in workplace for hundreds of years are shallow anyway.
yeah, which I
Um,
think is partly what going back to Cal Newport's book about the distinction between deep work and shallow work.
yes.
A lot of work. So basically, he's saying shallow work is kind of flipping around emails and going to meetings, whereas the deep work is the strategic thinking, the learning new things, the deep planning, that sort of thing. And a lot of work has become that. I suppose it's always going to be, but it's also the nature of the structure, the nature of work. So when we talk about knowledge or wisdom workers that bring all of themselves to work in the sense of they actually have to engage deeply in a situation. Doing more of that type of thinking can add significantly more value than just flipping around emails, which often is the case. Obviously, we need to do a bit of both, but in the same way, I always use the example of Richard Feynman, who was a Nobel Prize winning academic in physics. And he famously said that I deliberately became very bad at admin. And that was because he had to go to all these meetings and he found all these meetings and things were getting in the road of his research. So he deliberately started not finishing reports and not turning up time and missing meetings, such that he got this reputation that he was really unreliable around the admin. And that was exactly what he wanted to do because he didn't want to get asked to do that stuff. And he wanted to just focus on his deep work, which was his research.
Interesting.
It's probably not something I'd suggest to people in organizations to do because you might get fired. But in the same way, it starts to address what's the important work here. And particularly if you're working in your strengths, what should you be working on as compared to everybody else? And the idea that we're still all, oh, you do that, and it's all kind of random, as distinct from, oh no, Ian, you're brilliant at that. We want you to be actually running and managing that. Such an important piece.
I work with a group of accountants. In fact, I've worked with several groups of accountants over the years, but I remember one particular group where one of the ladies in the group, we'll call her Susan, it's not her real name, but we'll call her Susan, and she was incredibly analytic.
Mm.
And so when it came to financial reports, in terms of the analysis of things, they were absolutely breathtakingly brilliant.
Yeah.
The trouble was that most of the people in the team didn't want that.
Oh.
They wanted a visual.
Yeah,
They wanted to be able to see it in a pie chart or whatever. And she was providing all this detailed data. And as I say, it was breathtakingly brilliant. And the insights that she brought to the table were incredible, but nobody valued it.
yeah,
So the conversation that I had with Susan and the rest of the team was around how could she bring her breathtakingly valuable insights to the group in a way that they really valued.
yeah,
And so over
yeah,
time, the meaningful work became around not the data, but how she pictured the data. And over time, she got really good at pie charts and graphs and stuff that really intrigued the rest of the team. And it turned out she was spending less time doing the analysis in terms of its, the data, but more time in how she presented the data to other people. And it really led to just wonderful, meaningful and valuable work for everyone concerned.
yeah. It's kind of what we hinted at before, isn't it? It's like we don't work in isolation. So even though I might be brilliant analytically, unless I can convert and translate that so other people get value from it, it's actually not valuable. It might be valuable and really exciting for yourself, but it's actually not valuable because it's the collective pool of value that we're talking about here. Because at the end of the day, if you want to be really blunt and specific, we're in the business of growing the business. We all are. And as a consultant or a coach, we're kind of in the same space. We're still in the business of making that other person be successful. So for me to have it's like me writing a book. I could write the best book ever, but if no one ever reads it, is it the best book? Probably not.
True.
And that's kind of the interactions that have to happen now. And so I think that you can't separate this conversational, relational background to our work these days.
No, and I think when we add rare to the equation, so it's meaningful for me, valuable for you. If possible, it's meaningful for all and valuable for all. But then if it's rare as well, then there's something magical about it. I give a little example. I created an acronym to help one of my peer groups to solve what was quite a nitty-gritty sort of problem for most of the people in the group. And I created a bit of an acronym to help them to think about the important facets of the process. And at the end of a conversation about it, I said to the group, did you find that valuable? And people said, well, yeah, they did, but could I have tweaked it a bit to make it more distinctive or rarer? And that led to an even more interesting conversation because, good morning, Jamie.
Morning. How is everyone?
Good.
Sorry you're a bit late joining us, Jamie, but
thank you for sending the link. It's never popped up in my calendar. It's in the calendar, but
there you go. So we've got Geoff, who I think you've met before and know.
Has been on, yes, yep.
And we've got Paul, who's on the train in Brisbane at the moment. He'll be off shortly. So we've just been having this, probably a perfect time to do a bit of a summary, Geoff.
Yes. So I think what I've been saying, maybe you've been hearing something else, but it's kind of, we've been looking at meaningful and valuable and understanding that meaningful has two parts to it. One is the work and one is what you bring to the work. And then the valuable seems to be the value it provides to others rather than if you're sitting in isolation. So we use the example, if I wrote a book, and no one ever read the book, is it meaningful and valuable? Well, it's probably meaningful for me, but it's not very valuable if no one's got access to those ideas. So this interaction, relationships, conversations are so crucial to being able to share that value and extend the meaning across the whole group. What did you come up with, Ian? What was your version of what we were doing?
No, I think that's pretty much as we're saying, and we've got Paul on camera now, so that's great, Paul.
Cool. He's not on the train anymore.
And yeah, I think it's one thing to be doing something that's meaningful for me, but it's altogether another thing that it's valuable for you.
Yeah.
And I'm always trying to make sure that it's both. And as I said, Jamie, and as you already know, my work is to do what I love with people who love what it does for them. And I think that's the trick. It's got to be both. And then we're just talking before you came on, Jamie, about if it's rare as well. So if it's something that's out of the box or unusual, then it presents a bit of a trilogy, meaningful, valuable, and rare. So Paul, you've been reflecting while you're on the train. Maybe it's time for you to give us a bit of a heads up about what you're feeling about all this.
So two parts for me. One is when we're talking about the conversations, the real conversations, the live conversations. I think that for so many of us, when we think about those more difficult or sticky or emotive topics, the thought is, actually, I'd rather not. Rather not talk about it, rather not share, rather not contemplate that, rather not have to process the uncomfortable thoughts that you maybe would like to share with me. And in our virtually disconnected world, you don't have to, because we're so encouraged into sort of social media space where it's okay, you can just text each other. If you don't feel like responding, you don't have to really listen properly. I think it's kind of mix of different elements for me. And part of it is that we're encouraged in that space. It suits someone's agenda, just not ours. So that's at a conversation level piece. And then, for what Geoff's talking about meaningful work, it's the same thing. Would you really like to put yourself out there? Paint the best picture that you can? No, actually, I'd rather not. I'll just do something mundane and stay below the radar. And somehow there was sort of mix of thoughts I had.
Yeah, I think that's crucial though. There's that balance. So it's a tricky one around the technology. It's easy to use the technology as I'm going to have a private conversation. So this was kind of like if I was presenting on stage and the audience are all tweeting to each other and I'm not got the Twitter feed, then I'm out of that loop. That's not ideal because you've got different stories going on. But it is also, regardless of the technology, you're going to get let's say a group of 10. I might turn to the person next to him and go, hey, what did you think of that? And we have a private conversation. So privacy is actually an important part, but I also get your point that it's the contribution and the value to the overall group that makes the difference. So let's say it this way, the key killer on innovation is not generating ideas, it's getting people to share the ideas. Because if the idea is not shared, clearly it goes nowhere. Yeah. And it's only when we have the courage or whatever it is to speak our ideas that we have a chance for that to impact or add value to other people.
Yeah. And it's the environments we work in that discourage that.
Yeah.
Because for a start, you don't have to show up, you don't have to speak, you don't have to share. Just stay on your phone.
From a leadership perspective, that's actually a really crucial goal, to actually have everybody on the court contributing. And it will be in different ways and at different levels. But to have that culture or that feeling or that experience of this is a safe place for me to share my thoughts.
Seth Godin's one of the guys I like to follow in terms of what he talks about. He talks about people's sort of writer's block phenomenon or reluctance to share their content or their writing. And one of the retorts that he gives is, okay, so show me some of your bad writing then. Give me your worst idea, just anything, just put it out there, but share something.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's a merry-go-round. If we're not sharing, well, how can we? It's kind of conducive. If I'm sharing something, you're more likely to share something as well. So that's very much an underrated leadership position. And to some extent, I think it actually comes back to, if you look at the history of organizations and being around factories, we don't actually want to know what's going on for you emotionally or in your head. It's just turn up and press that button and watch the machine go clunk. Whereas these days, we can't operate like that. You've got to bring all of yourself to work, and the leader needs to encourage that you do that and engage people in that way.
And I think including when things don't work.
Most critically, yeah.
One of the most meaningful ways, I think, to live out loud and to have the kind of conversations that we're talking about and to do meaningful, valuable, rare work is a willingness to talk about what didn't work. And I recall Jamie, because Jamie's part of my Monday peer group, and often, and Monday just happened that Jamie was in the hot seat, but Jamie talked about a moment where, he lost the plot and he was able to share that moment, and the rest of the group found it highly valuable. And there's been a number of exchange of emails since. So it was Jamie's willingness to be vulnerable. And I think this is a key to meaningful work. It's also a key to valuable work, because if I'm willing to put myself out there and you're willing to put yourself out there, then we end up with something magical that comes as a consequence. And so I think, one of the, as Jamie will know, and as Geoff probably knows as well, I'm not a fan of pretty much any politician. And one of the reasons is because they have an inability to admit mistakes. Whereas real leaders, on the other hand, are very comfortable in admitting mistakes and being vulnerable. Just imagine if Morrison, who I personally, thinks a poor leader, just imagine if he come out today in a press conference and said, look, I'm really sorry, but we've screwed this up. We've messed up the vaccination rollout. We've messed up quarantine. We haven't done really anything right. but my commitment to you today is we're going to do this, this, and this in order to put it right. I'm really sorry, and I apologise that we fucked it up.
I'd give him another
Imagine
go.
what kind of response that would get.
Yeah.
It would.
Yeah.
Honest truth.
And isn't that what real leaders do?
That sounds like you're a very generous soul, Geoff. But part of it, I think, is we're not taught how do you admit mistakes. Because if you think, okay, so Monday, my decision was we should do this. And so we don't know how to position or describe how we revisit that. We don't know how to say, actually, new information's come to light. I now know about this and this and this. And therefore, the direction we're heading on Monday is not the best one for us. This is actually the best one, based on the feedback and all the information I've got.
And that was there's a famous line, you might know it, Geoff, I've only got it loosely in my brain, but I think it was John Maynard Keynes, the famous economist. He said, in response to a question about he changed his mind about something, quite major in his theory. And he said, well, I've got new information, therefore I've changed my mind. Isn't that what you do, sir? That's how the quote goes, something like that.
Yeah.
And it's the same kind of thing you're saying, Paul. Because if a leader can't be vulnerable and can't admit mistakes, what's the point?
Well, I think that's the humanity piece, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think it's ingrained in us, as a leader to, it's incumbent on us to technically not make those mistakes, because everyone's looking up, at me, Yeah,
it's the idea that we have to be perfect.
Yeah, that's right.
And of course we do.
Yeah.
Except the question is, who benefits from that?
Yeah.
Only those who sell perfection.
Correct.
I was talking to an ex-teacher recently, and they said their view was that we train our kids the wrong way. And we train them by having tests that if you get something wrong, it's bad. And most of us then go through life trying not to be bad, which is kind of a normal thing to do, but it's actually not that useful.
No, I think it's ingrained in us, not to fail.
And the similar one, so I'm a big fan of simple rules so that you have guidelines and things to work off rather than complex plans. And the trick on that one is everybody was trained at school that in grade 1 you do simple, but in grade 6 you do more complex things. So the idea we also grew was that we actually need to do complex things as well to show that we're smart, clever, and can lead people. But some of these things, and that's why I think the key word there is around the vulnerability, being willing to admit, oh, hang on, I don't have all the answers, and I might have even got that wrong, and then drawing people back to you to go, hey, how are we going to move forward here? What do you reckon?
I think it's a key to meaningful, valuable, and rare, the idea of being vulnerable. There's no one greater, of course, than Brené Brown probably in this space. I also think you touched on something there, Geoff, about plans. As you may know, I'm a pioneer in plans on a page. I first created them 35 years ago. But I've shifted of recent times. I still think plans are valuable, but I've moved more to processes on a page. Because I think when we follow a proven process, the outcome takes care of itself.
Yep.
And so, because most plans go astray for whatever reason, but processes, we can stay with them. I remember my golfing teacher once upon a time, he said to me, there are really only 3 things you have to worry about to put the ball down the middle of the fairway. He said, the trick is to have them all going at once. Of course, that's the challenge for all golfers, but there really only is 3 things that matter in the swing. And when those 3 things are happening, so it's the process, in other words. And I think in most workplaces, I'm interested in you guys, what you think. In most workplaces, the environment's not conducive to following processes that are good for people, or processes that bring out the best in people. And when I say process, I mean, policies, procedures, practices, principles, philosophies, all these things are all processes. In most organizations, they don't mean that it's simple for people to bring their best to the work. And therefore, to your point, Geoff, that meaningful work is both the work, but it's also more what we bring to the work. And I think we're on a mission, probably the 4 of us, to we've got to take a blowtorch to bureaucracy. We've got to get rid of red tape. We've got to get rid of self-interest. And whatever else is actually stopping people from being able to bring their best to their work and therefore find meaning in the work. What's your thoughts on this?
That's a very uncomfortable topic. So I'll use an example. I met a lady recently who's expecting her first child. She's a month or two away from giving birth. And so she works for, shall we say, a health organization, to be generic. And if you look at it, an expectant mother would say that the best form of childcare is one that's right there at their place of work. They'd like to be able to go back to the workplace. They'd like to be comfortable that their child is safe and that if they're needed, they're easily available for call. Except in this environment, they don't do any of that. And I think that when you talk about meaningful work and the scenario you're talking about, it doesn't start with people. That's how you know that it's skewed. It doesn't start with, okay, so what would make this most comfortable for you? Let's start with you.
Well, it should start with people, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we should be asking people,
yes, how
does this work for you? I mean, I was in a somewhere the other day. Where was it? It was a hospital, but I was in the restaurant of a hospital. This was the day before lockdown here in Victoria. And my wife and I were having lunch in the restaurant of a hospital. And just over there was a young, I imagined a young doctor by her attire, breastfeeding her child. And I thought, how wonderful that in this environment, that here we are having a mother doing what's the most natural thing you could possibly do for the child. And yet I imagined the conversation that was going on in that restaurant from people who probably thought it was inappropriate. But
feeding yourself in the restaurant, huh?
Meaningful. I thought it was a perfect example of a meaningful workplace where a woman's able to do what's natural for her child. And yet I wasn't imagining the conversations that were probably happening.
Yeah, I think it's the nature. Again, I still bring it back to that there's such a legacy from the industrial age and the factory that it was purely about production. And I think to a certain extent, it's become about transaction between people. And it's taking something extra to actually bring this humanity back into the workplace. And ultimately, if you're talking about, so put it this way, so if I'm working for you, then you want me to be in my best, to be at my best. What is it actually going to take for me to be at my best and show up and bring my best of myself to my work? That needs to be the goal. Because if you can get your teams to be bringing their best to work each day, it's kind of like the process sorts itself out. That is the process. If you deal with that side of it, then they kind of are going to do some good work, you would think.
Well, I think it's the context, isn't it? And let me sort of put it to you in this way. I think we're in the purpose age right now. And I think we've been here for maybe 25 years. It's just that for most people, they're not conscious of it yet. And this is part of the reason why there's so much talk about purpose. And I want to lead our conversation in that direction. But you think about 12,000 years ago, we were in the agricultural age. And there were really only two kinds of people, really. There were landowners and labourers. Then we came to the Industrial Revolution that you've been talking about, Geoff, and not a lot changed because it was then business owners and employees. But in both those first two ages, people were thought of as, they were the workers. And it wasn't until the information age that maybe began in about 1950, and Drucker coined that term, the knowledge worker. So we're starting to get paid for who we were and what our knowledge and so on, more than just our physical skills. And I think we've shifted away from that. I think there's still information age, there's still knowledge workers, but today's about wisdom workers. It's people who are able to bring who they are to what they do, not just their knowledge, but to bring who they are. And this is why I think we're in the purpose age. and I noticed, I think it was a post on LinkedIn yesterday, Geoff, might have been around purpose that you put on. I know you've explored this a bit, but a lot of people still don't understand purpose. And a lot of people are still struggling to find purpose. And so let's explore this idea. What's purpose? Where does it fit with meaningful, valuable, rare work?
The thought occurs to me that in most workplaces, when you start with that as a conversation topic, most people are thinking in the back of their heads, I don't care. I don't care what your purpose is. It's too uncomfortable for me to contemplate mine, and definitely too uncomfortable for me to hear what yours is, and then try and fix that into our conversation. It's like, that's just overload.
And yet in the great workplaces, in the purpose-driven workplaces, purpose-driven workplaces are accelerating. When I began doing this work 30 years ago, there were no purpose-driven workplace, zero, zilts, nada. But now there are a lot, and it's accelerating. And the conversation in those workplaces is about personal purpose and where it aligns with team purpose, and where that team purpose aligns with organizational purpose. So you've got the three in alignment: personal purpose, team purpose, or group purpose, and then organizational purpose. And I see that conversation happening more and more in more organizations. And those organizations that are not having those conversations, well, they're the dinosaurs of the next few years. I read a report this morning. Worldwide, we are subsidizing fossil fuel companies to the tune of $4.4 trillion. That's the subsidies. Now, if we were purpose-driven, we would be investing some of that money, at least, in finding alternatives. One of the reasons why the fossil fuel companies claim that they need to exist is that there's yet no alternative to make steel unless you use coal. Well, I reckon we're better than that as a human race, and we should have already come up with a way. And probably there's already an invention out there that doesn't use coal to make steel. It's just that it's not popular, therefore and this is all part of the purpose. What's the purpose of an organization? I think part of the purpose of an organization is to solve society's problems. I don't think profit is a purpose of an organization. I think profit is a result of being good at business, but it's not a reason for being in business.
Yeah, I think that's an important piece, because I think that's what changes the conversation. Whereas if you look back traditionally, the conversation has been very much driven around profit and shareholder value. And that's important from a sustainability point of view. You need to be able to do that to maintain the organization and grow the organization over time. But as you've said, it's not the reason the organization exists. And it's kind of the same when I work with individuals. I think a lot of us as individuals, we might start our business as from, I don't want to do that job, I now want to do this. So therefore we hustle to make a buck for a while. But at some point we reach the plateau where we're kind of got enough money, or we've got enough certainty around that. So therefore it does need to shift into some other focus, because there is lots of studies that show that money ultimately is not a motivator. It's only what it enables us to do from it that actually is the motivation.
And I think a classic example of that is the organisation I work for, Hames Paint. We're 86 years old this year, and the purpose changed maybe 3 years ago, was about getting to 100 years of age. So it wasn't about making a shitload of money and having 500 stores around Australia and It's to be one of less than 10 in Australia's history, 100-year-old family-owned businesses, to last that long. So, so the purpose around, so they're at that point of the money fine. Profit now is all about just reinvesting to make us better and sustainable to get to that 100-year point. And then whatever happens from there will be up to the fourth generation if they choose to come into the business. So literally everything we're doing at the moment, and the way we're setting up and the way we're structuring and the way we're organising is around being strong and viable and survivable to be in 50 years' time. Now, unfortunately, not a lot of parts of this business have grabbed hold of that. But if you go back to the family and the board and their main reason, and what they're continually driving down through us is exactly that.
It's a wonderful purpose. I mean, someone asked me as recently as an hour or so ago, what's your purpose? Because I'd made a comment somewhere on LinkedIn, might have been on one of your posts, Geoff, and somebody I was talking to had seen that and asked, well, what's your purpose? Tell us what your purpose is. Well, to me, it's quite simple. The reason that I got up this morning is I'm going to make a difference.
Yep.
And I make a difference by doing what I love for people who love what I do for them. End of story.
That was why I was going back through my notebook before, and I was trying to find when we had that session, just to make sure that, you asked us, what was our purpose, and we came back the next week, and I was just, it's still in here. I just wanted to make sure that, and that was to guide and make people and better leaders. I think that's what my purpose is in my current role within Hames Paint. And post my meltdown last week, it's also to change how we discussed it on Monday. It's about our rules, so. And I've written here, what is your purpose / what are your rules, because I think both of them, I've had to realign them in the last 5 days. And when I say not realign them, I've got to bring them back together. So what I preach and deliver at work, I wasn't delivering at home, and I've changed my rules at home to bring them more in line with who I am as a leader at work.
Yeah, I think that's a crucial piece. Sorry.
Just going to sort of add there that, if we're truly following our purpose, some people call it true north. If we're doing that and we're good at it, we make lots of money. The jury's no longer out about this. Purpose-driven companies, the latest report I read, are 20% more profitable than those that aren't. So, it's a clear difference.
Makes perfect sense, just based on the fact that the people who are in there because they want to be, they're engaged, they want to pass on the success.
No problem with employee engagement in purpose-driven companies.
Yeah, but I'm sorry to make a rude comment, but can you imagine how disengaged people are inside any of the large banks we have?
Yeah.
All the conflict that goes on inside them about what they do and impacts they're having on people and the ethics inside their organization. I mean, it's just a total contrast.
Well, some of those people might actually fit the cultures that are there. So if you let's look at the extreme example of AMP coming out of the banking inquiry. There was clearly some people in there that were loving what they were doing, but it was also at the expense of others. So, but I think the point there was that was not sustainable, and it might have taken a banking inquiry to actually end some of those dodgy practices. But people clearly were out there, rolling along, doing what they were doing, and at some level enjoying it. And they might not have consciously been enjoying it, but they were kind of delivering on what they thought the value of the organization was. But it was kind of driven towards the dollars.
Even if you remove the money from the equation, the description you're providing there, you could apply to drug dealers. and we would take offense at that. Oh, that's terrible. I mean, that's a scourge on society. Well,
yeah. No, I totally agree. I laugh because I always go back to, there's a book and a TV show called The Corporation. And they studied a corporation as if it was a person. And they came up with, well, if this corporation was a person, it'd be a sociopath, because it actually had no feelings towards anybody else. And they did whatever they had to just serve their own ends. And that's a sociopath.
Yeah.
And even they went as far as saying a lot of CEOs of some of these companies actually demonstrate the same qualities of sociopaths. We're not calling them all sociopaths, but it's kind of interesting to have that as a expectation or an approach. And that's where I like Jamie's comment that it was kind of realigning, that it was bringing his humanity to work, but making sure he brought his humanity back to his family when he wasn't at work. That's kind of the ball game here. And hopefully, I think, as Ian's saying, is when you're true to your purpose, hopefully it lifts you across all of your life, because it's not like, oh, I have this purpose and I do it over here from 9 to 5 and then I go home and beat my kids up. It's like, that wouldn't be very consistent, would it?
No.
Pretty wonderful purpose when you think about it. If someone said, my purpose is to bring my humanity to work and to take it home with me again,
that'd actually be okay, wouldn't it? You'd take
it's got purpose, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there are so many corporates and corporate leaders that would struggle with that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, the good news is that I think that's shifting, and I think part of the role of each of us is to help us. I mean, here's the reality. Doing good is not everyone's intention. That's the reality.
I'd say people would say they're doing good. So I have this conversation with people about whether they eat healthy food, and almost everybody says they eat healthy food. But then there's so many variations and levels about what's healthy for people. And I think most people were saying, like, I think even a criminal, and I'm completely guessing here, might say I was trying to do good things. And it might not be good by my standards or your standards, but for them, it might have just been to satisfy their own greed or need, but they saw it as that was the right thing to do, because otherwise they wouldn't have done it.
Yeah. I guess there's a bit of truth in it. I was really talking about, it's the philosophy and ethics called enlightened self-interest.
Yes, we've all got that.
I think maybe that is human nature, but I think the reality is there are some people out there forgotten their nature. And they're just out there screw everyone else.
Nelson Mandela has a very interesting quote. He says that children are not born with hatred in their heart. They have to be taught that.
Yeah.
And so my background is South Africa. So I come from a particularly traumatized country and culture in terms of that sort of space. But when you think about that, about the children aren't born with hatred in their heart, they have to be taught that, I think that's very true. And I certainly was witnessed that myself growing up in that space. And I think you could take that analogy and put it across into the workplace, is that fundamentally people do care about one another, and they want others to succeed, and they want their best interests at heart. But in the workplace, that generally speaking isn't true, and they have to be taught that. That has to be the culture you have to develop.
Yeah, there's an idea that's similar to that in the Buddhist.
It's insightful. Yeah.
There's an idea that's similar to that in the Buddhist space about the purpose of meditation and mindfulness is to bring yourself back to your natural state. So most of us, if you think about it, are kind of either stressed or distracted or whatever, which is not our natural state. And I think that's what you're speaking to there, that there is some kind of natural state, that I don't hate everybody in the world. And at some point I had to learn otherwise. And I think that's the powerful place, that if we can get ourselves back to some sense of it, and it's kind of this, how do I show up as my best me? How do I bring my best me to work? Is kind of the personal objective every day for me. How do I actually show up? And some days are going to be, it's like a footballer. Some days you're going to have a blinder of a game and some days you're not. But it's about how do I actually, and you hear the footballers talk about it, it's like do the process so you have a better chance of being consistently at your best. And that's kind of what we're looking for. But it is about the whole human.
Yeah.
I think it's who before do.
Yeah.
It's being who we are, and meditation and other mindfulness practices lead us to that place, as you say, natural state. I call it rhythm. Let's just remind ourselves. Put your hand on your heart for a moment, and just breathe with that flow, because in a conversation with other people, we actually increase our heart rate and we increase our energy, but it's not our natural flow. It's not our natural rhythm. And often just stay in that rhythm, because what you're feeling is a unique heart rate. Nobody else has that pulse.
Oh, really?
And to be who we are, I think, Robert Louis Stevenson, he captured it the best I've ever heard. He said, to be who we are and to become all that we're capable of becoming is the only purpose in life. So that's where purpose begins. My purpose is to be who I am, that unique, one-of-a-kind human being that I am, just as you are, to be that person. And meaningful, valuable and rare work flows from that place in my view. Who before do. If I'm being true to myself, I can do meaningful work that's valuable for you. And if I'm really in tune with that, I can do rare work as well.
That is certainly the culture of the tribes where we came from. So thousands of years ago, everybody contributed in some way because the success of the tribe was the success of the individual and vice versa. Whereas that's been beaten out of us. But don't worry about it. It's only your success that counts. Don't worry about anybody else. Just worry about yourself.
Beaten out of us literally in some cases.
And we partly go to work as a group, but then we sit in our separate cubicles. So even our design of our environments kind of separate us again. And then I come home to my isolated house, so I don't have to think about the guy next door kind of thing. So there's a lot of structural things in there as well. Whereas if you think literally the tribe, we're literally living together on the same plane next door to each other. So there's a lot of differences there.
Yeah, in the same cave on top of each other. So you had to care about what was happening to the other person.
Yeah. So there is a disconnect there, but again, I think that's the goal of the leader, to bring those people together in ways and try to find ways to have those connections happen. And try to dismantle the ones that separate people, because it is the collective that makes the difference.
So Geoff, I'm interested in, apart from mindfulness, meditation, eating well, exercise that you've sort of touched into, which I agree with all of those. What are other practices that we can do to be true to ourselves and therefore bring ourselves to our work, which by definition means meaningful, valuable, and rare?
I think you certainly need to. So my bias would be about learning and getting back to your core roots. It's kind of that piece of, if we're going to talk about purpose, there's kind of, I guess my point in the thing I wrote about on LinkedIn a couple of days ago was that we tend to look at this big picture of purpose as this vision or something down the track. And that's really useful, empowering, inspiring, all that. But it's also, we need to pay attention to what's actually going on in the moment. And I think it's almost as simple as, and I don't mean this is easy, but it's almost as simple, but not easy, is that it's about being intentional and purposeful in what we're doing or bringing to a situation all through the day. So I guess that's like, for me right now, it's like, okay, what am I trying to say here? What's purposeful and my intent in what I'm trying to say here? And if I can bring that to my interactions with people during the day. So I think the social one for me is kind of the big one. It's kind of first starts here, but at the end of the day, it's how am I actually going to interact with other people is kind of one of those powerful intents. I think I always bring it back to all of the religions have a similar thought where you treat thy neighbor as you want to be treated. And I think that's the simplest way of saying it. There's all sorts of things around compassion and empathy and all the rest of it. But the simplest one is just treat other people how you want to be treated. You know, so it's like say hello, engage with them, get where they're at, that sort of stuff. It's kind of simple in idea, maybe more difficult to do.
I'm not a fan of the golden rule.
I was about to say the same. We've explored this in Ian's group. Yeah.
I think the golden rule is selfish. I'm more interested in the platinum rule. Tony Alexandra was the guy I first come across, and he said, treat other people as they expect to be treated. And so it's not treating me as I expect to be treated, rather I'm treating you as you expect to be treated. Because it differs from person to person.
But it forces you to think from their perspective and what they might want.
Yeah.
And it kind of leads to, there was a wonderful line, Jim Rohn, and it was a conversation about purpose I heard many years ago. He's long gone, sadly, but he said, wherever you are, be there.
Yes. Yeah.
And I reckon that's the thing, comes back to Jamie's thing, you know, bring your humanity to work, but take it back home again. If you're home, be there.
Yeah.
If you're with someone in a conversation, obviously be there. If you're out in the street and you bump into someone, be there.
Yeah.
Nigel Risner, a great English colleague, speaker of ours, he says, when you're in the room, be in the room, which is another way of describing that. But I like the platinum rule. Treat other people as they expect to be treated.
And the reason I like that when we explored this last year, Ian, was that I personally don't really care if I'm abused or treated poorly or da-da-da. And I can tell you, so if I think, well, I'll treat you as I don't mind being treated, then should I abuse you or treat you poorly or da-da-da? I mean, no, I should actually treat you, irrelevant how I don't mind being treated, treat you how you want to be treated, and it changed.
It's a key to value when you think about it, because if I say to you, if we agree on certain things that you want from me, and then I say to you, how would you like those to be delivered to you, given to you, then I'm really putting you in the first place. I mean, Zig Ziglar was onto this as well. He said the easiest way to get what you want is to help other people get what they want. So, this is a truthful adage, put other people first, find out what they want, and then give it to them. It's not rocket science, but give it to them in a way that they find valuable and meaningful for them. And I think that's the hard part. I think I know what my clients want, giving it to them in a way that they find valuable and meaningful. That's the tricky bit.
And I suppose you have to dig a bit deeper, because often what people express as what they want is not actually what they want.
True.
It's not because they're wrong. It's okay, so when you say you want that, how does that manifest for you? How will it benefit you? So are you talking more about this?
What does it look like? What does it feel like?
Yeah.
That's the conversation, isn't it? Because I think, and people are confused, of course, between wants and needs. And often in the in the selling game, we've all been in from one way or another. Working out the difference between what someone wants and what they need is one of the great things, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's language, Paul, that you're touching on. When we ask the question, we've got to listen to the answer.
Yes. Yeah, and also peeling off the layers of, okay, so you say you want that. Is that because somebody's told you that's a good idea? You can't ask that, but oh yeah. Okay, so how does that actually benefit you? Well, it doesn't. Okay, so then what is it that you're looking for then? Because doing what somebody else thinks you should do just because they think that's a good idea doesn't necessarily benefit you and get you close to where you want to.
And it all comes down then to then saying to people, so from what I hear you saying, what you'd like me to do is X, Y, Z. And if there's a positive comes back from that, then we're on the right track. But often we fail to ask that question or make that statement. I mean, simply it's reflective listening, but often we don't reflect.
And gets back to the purpose discussion.
It
So
does.
what is your purpose? That. Okay, so if I give you this, how does that move you closer to that? Well, it doesn't. Okay, so then let's talk more about this.
Yeah, I think that's a great reference point.
I think one of the keys of being a good communicator is to keep checking in with people as to our message effectiveness. Did you hear me say this, or did you hear me say that? Just checking in, because sometimes clearly we haven't been clear with our message. And I think this affects the meaning of our work as well. I would spend, I don't know about you, Geoff, but I would spend more time thinking about the question I'm going to ask than probably anything else.
Well, I think Einstein got that one, didn't he? Asking the right question is more important than the answer, because we can come up with answers easily.
Yes, he's 100% right. But in the work that I do, the main area I focus on is getting the question right, because the question is what helps someone change their perspective.
Yeah.
When they think about something, oh yeah, I hadn't looked at it from that point of view. Oh, okay, now I see things differently. Okay, good. Now what are you going to do?
There's an Egyptian writer whose name just escapes me at the moment, but he said something like, you can tell someone is clever by their answers, but you can tell someone is wise by their questions. And I think that's an insightful look at this whole area of meaningful, valuable, rare work. Geoff, I'm interested in what's something that you haven't done yet that you think might be the next step in this journey of in your work, you're helping experts to do whatever they want to do from anywhere. That's your mission. Is there something yet that you haven't done that you think might add value to that whole process?
It's a tricky question because it's kind of asking for a negative of thoughts. I'm not sure at the moment. I think it's more a case of just, well, kind of similar to what we've just been saying over the last 5 minutes. It's actually just getting in the trenches with the troops and finding out what they need. I have my versions of what I need. So if it was just about me, I think I've just got to keep going with what I'm doing. But I know there's things out there that I don't know yet. So I think the goal really is to find out what they are. And I don't know the answer to that right now. So good example of a good question that forces me into inquiry about, oh, what is the answer here? Because I don't know the answer right now.
Jamie and Paul, have you had any sort of things that have coming to you in the last week or so, maybe even today, that is something that you know you should do, but you haven't yet done?
Get better at getting answers out of the audience. Ask them the right kind of questions that encourages the right sort of conversation that you can learn from, that sort of space. You know, there's one interesting observation for speakers. Speakers generally talk too much. Because the less you speak, the more people are engaging for themselves and also for you to learn from. It's that kind of space, I suppose.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at press conferences. I think they're a prime example of people who talk too much, and they should be listening more. You know, I want to see politicians have listening conferences where they're not allowed to speak. I want to see leaders in meetings where leaders are not allowed to speak.
Yes.
The whole objective is to listen. And to demonstrate at the end of the time that they've actually heard what people are saying, and then go from there.
Yeah, I think that's a great image for me about a press conference where there's more listening, because the point is you go out to this press conference and there's this issue you're addressing, you deliver your talk on it, and it wasn't what anybody had in mind. They didn't want to know about that. That wasn't their concern.
That's
but
right.
Now you've opened up a whole other can of worms.
Which is why there's confusion in our community about all sorts of things.
They're telling us what they want us to hear.
And it's the same thing that happens every day, of course, in the workplace, is a lot of workers actually don't know what's expected of them. Because the conversation's not been held. I mean, Jamie and I, we've done a lot of work in this together, but you know, job descriptions, for example, are a great, I think they're one of the great, they're one of the most miserable tools possible because they don't actually talk about relationships or value. And so Jamie and I have done a lot of work around role clarity as opposed to a job description, because when someone's role is clarified, right up the top is the purpose of the role. And then next is who that role has relationships with. And underneath that is what value is being delivered to each of those people. Now that creates meaningful, valuable, rare work, whereas a job description does the opposite, because all it ever talks about is tasks. And down the bottom, it often says, and anything else is directed. Well, who to that?
Same with an annual appraisal.
This is what I do with job descriptions.
But when you describe job descriptions like that, it resonates with me as a software programmer. Because that's how you write software. It must do this and then this. It must have these things in place and handle that and then that. But people are not software. They're not computers. They don't work like that.
No.
They just don't.
So that's a whole conversation that can happen. Just asking people what is actually meaningful for you. You know, tell me about your work. Tell me what you love about your work. Tell me how your work could be more meaningful to you. It's a very different conversation, isn't it? Because everyone has a place, everyone has a role, I mean, down here we talk about Australian rules football, of course, Paul, because it's a religion in this part of the world. But one of the great success stories is the Hawthorn Football Club, which I don't barrack for and Jamie doesn't barrack for, and I don't think you do either, Geoff. But
No.
they had a camp. They've won 4 premierships. So they're the most successful team of the last decade or so. Richmond, of course, closing the gap, or they were, but maybe not this year. But one of the things that Alistair Clarkson did as the coach of those 4 premierships was he had a thing called playing your role. And the whole club got involved. Supporters, everyone got involved. And it's one of the reasons why they've been so successful. Everyone knows their role. Everyone knows their purpose, in other words. And, you know, there are lots of stories around like that. When people know their purpose and it's aligned with other people's purpose, then magic happens.
Yeah, it's a powerful analogy. It's like being part of a mountain climbing club. And the question is, which peak are we going to climb this year? Okay, K2, good. And so when are we going to do it? Who's doing what? What's our success criteria? You as the team, you define that, not one person.
Yes, I've seen a number of interviews with Alistair Clarkson around why was he successful, and the answer he gives is because everyone's playing their role. When everyone's playing their role, we win, and when they're not, we don't.
Mm.
All right, we're coming to the top of our time. We've got about 10 minutes or so.
Sorry, but I have to go. I've got another one at now, 15:15. So yeah, but appreciate it. I've
taking the time to join us.
2 pages of notes in that short time, so it's a great conversation. So.
We'll see you soon, Jamie.
Thanks, guys. Nice to see you again.
Thanks, Jerry.
See you, mate.
Nice to meet you.
You too. Bye now.
So final reflections, guys, and we'll wrap it up.
I think for me, the fundamental thing is the humanity coming through. You know, I guess my simple version of it is that a lot of the time we were told not to bring ourselves to work. It was just turn up and do tasks. Whereas when we actually engage with, relate with, and be with other people, then that's actually the joy of being in business and the joy of life to a certain extent, that I'm actually working and helping with other people. So that's kind of pretty basic. But in the same way, that's also the opportunity or the possibility for what could get created next. And then that gets exciting at a time level as well.
I like it.
It's the celebration of us as individuals, something that's so heavily discouraged in all of the different spaces we operate in, whether the school example you used earlier or social media, period, all of it. None of it's about encouraging the individual in each of us.
It's often the most profound is in the simple, isn't it? It's the answer to what do I need to do to be more successful. I think the answer that you guys are reinforcing is be a better human.
Yeah, which is kind of back to the Robert Louis Stevenson quote about me being the best I can be is the best way I can contribute to others anyway. And it does start with me and what I bring to a situation rather than what I'm trying to get from something.
Yeah, and the opposite of that is people suggesting what you should do or should be or should look like or should show up as. You know, there's an unlimited list of people that want to tell you how to live your life. And all of that is contra to you, your purpose, you being useful to others.
I think that might be the way they think they can help, but it's also like, even if I asked you, what do you think I should do, Paul, and you give me your best honest answer, it's like, it's about taking that on board. And then ultimately I have to decide, what am I actually going to do with that? How am I going to respond to that? That's kind of the extra chunk of, I'm happy at times, like I'm also unhappy when a lot of people so it's like, as soon as you put something out there, there's lots of people that have got comments on it. That's fine. That's how we interact with it. But I'm not actually going to take on all those comments. It's kind of the position of reflection and consideration, and ultimately me being the authority in what I'm going to do next.
Yeah.
So,
But where it starts off with me telling you what you should do.
oh yeah, that's not helpful for you, let alone for me.
Yeah.
So I get your point there. Yes,
But
absolutely.
that's the essence of our school system, of our governments.
Yeah.
I think it's I don't listen to feedback I didn't ask for.
Yeah, that's kind of what it comes down to.
Nobody does.
But I think asking for input, Marshall Goldsmith called it feed forward, which I think is a much more powerful concept than feedback. Feedback can be valuable, but only if we ask for it, and only if it's coming from people we trust and who we know have our best interests, at heart.
Yeah. That's why questions are so much more powerful.
Yes.
I'm trying to help someone. Yeah, here's a question. Use it, don't use it. It's yours.
Yeah.
If that works for you.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So I think we're summarising our time together. Be the best human that you can be. That's the secret to meaningful, valuable, and rare work.
Yeah. And that sort of follows that it would be the best one that you can be, because you're unique. And therefore it does imply that it's going to have some meaning to you. It's going to be valuable to at least you. And also it's going to be rare. It's kind of the argument for the strengths movement again. It's like work in your strengths and deliver the best thing you can in that contribution.